Culture is part of everyday life. It's how we breathe, we dress, we talk. It's how we express ourselves in music and dance, in cuisine and in food. Education of this culture is often not done in the country, except through printed media. So here at the Yuchengco Museum, we're doing something totally now, relevant into the digital space. Our cultural education material from here on is going to move into digital space online so that people from all over the world can actually download and understand the exhibitions we have here in the Yuchengco Museum. Culture is a constantly changing energy. It is about pop, indigenous, traditional, contemporary also, and this is what we have to try to bring into film, into fora discussion, into dialogues and conversations online, so that even our Filipinos who are abroad, as well as our foreign friends, will understand what Philippine culture is from experts, from those who want to share their culture, and from the beautiful exhibitions that we have here at the Yuchengco Museum. The collection of weaving textiles, both the Cordillera and the various other exhibitions we've put together, have tried to focus on sharing the simplicity of understanding our indigenous textiles. There is a revival now in both fashion and in the lifestyle space of being able to use motifs, to use our textiles both for apparel and for home use. And we felt that the designers needed to understand more what this was about. It's not just about using any textile for any purpose and use, when we know that our textiles and our weaving tradition is so rich and often very much ingrained with the rituals of the daily lives of our community and our indigenous cultural peoples. So we needed to bridge this understanding with a whole young generation who think it's just ethnic, who look at it from an exclusive space, which is culture and not part of daily life. So we're riding this revival of pride in our culture, pride in being able to use these textiles and weavings, but making our users, us as normal people, the young and those in the non-culture field, understand that when they use it, they have to have knowledge about what is they're using and therefore have pride and can share this. This becomes, therefore, our way of allowing culture to be disseminated and understood, and at the same time, the weaving tradition to continue for livelihood. Because at the end of it, our indigenous peoples will just continue doing the same thing because it is part of their life. So in bridging this, our collection, through an exhibition highlighting the important messages, symbols, and stories of these motifs, why the colors are used this way, why the patterns are done such and cannot be done another way, allows us now to bridge so that designers who create these other products that are more lifestyle oriented, or if people who put this in their homes as part of their interior design, can understand that there is something more than just a piece of cloth. It is a weaving tradition that incorporates the spirituality of our indigenous peoples. The motifs that are there, the patterns used, the exact color schemes, for example, that are incorporated for specific designs, are calculatedly theirs alone, per indigenous group, per cultural community. This specific individual angle must be seen and understood, that when you see Kalinga, it is totally different from that of our Maranao weaving. Or when you see something like a motif, for example, that is a star motif that is seen, for example, in our Ilocos Inabel textile, is totally different in a way by the way it is used when it is from our southern tribes. So the differentiating angles of use of motif, of even the way the use of the textile is. Others would use it as a malong, others would use it just for sometimes tablecloth, and others would use it for ritual, birth and death. So there's a great differentiation so that when a textile woven with meaning has great meaning in that community, woven by a master weaver, it must also be respected in the market space or in our daily life. And this is where we are, I believe, in exhibiting such collections, bringing together capsule collections so that people can understand it. And in this series of where we want to showcase a grouping of textiles, you would come to understand a little better that community, so that in understanding that, they become closer to you and you can also share it to others. So this is why this must be done, because at the end of it, when all is said and done and all of us are gone from here, those textiles remain. The culture will continue, and the younger generation of both the weavers and the users will be there. So wouldn't it be nicer to have a deeper understanding of things woven in some far-off community in the mountains near the waters, come to a cosmopolitan space, and potentially even in the global space? There has to be this understanding. Let's have a differentiation in understanding how the weavers weave. There will be those from the indigenous cultural communities where weaving tradition often is imbibed with a spiritual meaning. Then you have the lowland Christian tradition, which has been the areas perhaps of Panay, of Ilocos, the areas where the Christian, the Spaniards came to colonize us, and there was already a acculturation and a fusion of two cultures. This is another grouping. This is often what we call traditional textiles versus that of the indigenous cultural communities. And these are the communities that have not been touched by colonization. Two separate things, okay? So let us take a look at the weaving of the looms here in the local tradition of the cooperatives, like for example in lowland places like, for example, in Panay, where in Miagao at the 19th century was a center of weaving. This area would weave because of skill, because of designs that were often brought in from Spain and then brought into our local culture. And therefore, it does not as much have a spiritual meaning. It has a lot of tradition made by the women. It has a sense of design. So we must look at it from that perspective. When we begin to look at indigenous cultural communities weaving, that is where we begin to put in the perspective of spirituality. A lot of our weavers weave with a sense of connectedness to this bigger space, an openness which is connected to the mountains where they are, it's connected to the seas, and everything is interconnected. This in a way is very much very Filipino, the true essence of the Filipino. So when they weave a design, it was because either their goddess, their higher belief system, a form of what they call their god, or their guides and guardians and muses have given them, in a sense, design. It's a very creative process, because you know how art and creativity often, they say, comes from the muses. So this is the same thing. You will have them begin to put together designs within the vernacular, the motif vernacular of their specific indigenous community. For example, you will see repetitive designs when it comes to stripes, parallel with a panel where there is some kind of an anthropomorphic form, which is looking abstract. But actually, when you look deeper into that anthropomorphic form, you will find it is either an animal form, it can also be the inside tummy of a crocodile that ate a man, or it can be like a part of a womb of a woman, you know, like is in the Bagobo textile. Or the Bagobos have also these beautiful textiles that are just like flags, and it's all stripes, and they call it the bandera. Or the Tibolis with their unique ikat tradition, which is in a way very similar in Southeast Asia with this ikat tradition. So there is a sense of uniformity within their vernacular. When I say this, it's because each indigenous community has a sense of coloration that is uniquely theirs, have a sense of motif that is uniquely theirs, and also have a sense of patterning, of a repetition and a forming of patterns within the weave. That is why it is important to understand, so that when you see something striped, it is not just Kalinga, but it is also Bagobo, although material may be different in that one is abaca, another using cotton or polyester, but at the uniqueness of each in the mixture of color is what we have to take a look at. And this is where experts come in to be able to share what this is. When you look at the pattern that is repetitive, constantly either very meticulously done in a very mathematical format, you know, if there is a repetition of pattern, this repetition of pattern allows an understanding of eternity. I say this because our Philippine music has the same. It's a drone, continuous pattern of music and tone continuously happening. When this happens, people get into a trance state in music. When you look at a repetitive pattern in visual design, you will feel that your eyes can keep going because you'll know what's going to happen in the next panel, and a sense of continuity, balance, and equals eternity. You know, there's that spaceless feel that they want to get to. Even if their textile is only 12 inches wide because of the backstrap loom, maybe 18 inches wide depending on the span of their backstrap loom, especially since majority of our cultural weavers use the backstrap loom. You know? The weaving process is very much ingrained in everyday life, which means it's also that very spiritual space where when they come to sit and weave, it's because it is part of what their mga ninuno, their ancestors, their parents have taught them through time. They do not deviate so much from what the motif is because it is what has been shared. It is like a treasure of the community, handed down generation by generation, in that pride happens when a weaver becomes a master weaver in the exquisiteness of that design. And what has happened is that she has channeled the meaning of the motif and the color, even if she has to stay within the vernacular. When I say vernacular, the chosen motifs, colors, and forms of each group. So when we look at different kinds of patterns that are very repetitive, either crisscrossing and vertical, the weaver stays within the parameters of the loom in creating the eternity that is there. If geometry would bring us a sense of perfection, harmony, in a way it is very much sacred geometry, which is parallel to that of the universe and the cosmos. This is what the weavers try to do. In their little space, they try to bring the bigger space here for us to contemplate in the beauty of their design. So if you see a star, then a stripe that happens, then another empty panel, it is the same as when you look up to the sky. The stars are not clumped together. They are in a nice pattern, and they try to put that in the same space where it is in. When you see panels where there is human forms, right? It's still part of that cosmology in that space of the textile. So it's very spiritual when you begin to really look deeper into the design, specifically for indigenous cultural community textiles, because it's really, it's just part of their life. They don't have to think too hard, you know? They don't have to think, will I make this blue here or make this red? Their sense of individuality isn't there. It's about being part of a community, part of a weaving process, part of a belief system. So all of us in this community weave the same. Even if one weaver might be better in this design or technical in this one, but within that shared belief system is a shared expression of a shared form. And this is our little universe. The motifs of all our indigenous woven textiles come from what they see around them. They see a horse or a carabao and a man, they put that there in some kind of simplified motif. They see the star, so there's a beautiful star. They see a bigger star, so there's a bigger star. They see, for example, a mountain, so mountains are created in a very abstract form. So through time, man has always simplified. It's just the way it is in expressing art, no? The simpler it is, sometimes the deeper the sense of the intangible that is present. So within the patterns that are beautiful, we need to see that there is a whole dimension of meaning. So when one weaver decides that she, or sometimes he, but mostly are she's, are going to do patterning, for example, of all the crocodiles. So the crocodiles are there because you will see now that they're very much part of daily life, and they must either give meaning to that relationship with crocodile, or they must give a sense of, it's a life meaning, actually, that's what it is. So when you look at the patterns repeated, it's just, again, part of that cosmology of what they're trying to depict. I think that when we look at motifs, sometimes two motifs that are different are put together. There's a story. Sometimes panels will find a whole storyline of different motifs. And this is when the weaver begins to be a storyteller. There's two. You have the very fantastic weaving that is done on a very trance-like channeled state. And we have our master weavers really fantastic with this. They become almost like babaylans and channelers. Babaylan is like, your priestess that can bring down that form. But you also have storytellers within the tribe that attempts to do this. And I've seen beautiful textiles that sometimes have different motifs, not so structured in pattern, but it's already telling a story. I always believe that the cultural community carry a shared belief system. So the ego space of, which is very Western and in our contemporary culture, that ego space of this is my art, this is my way of doing it, is really not there or should not really be there. What has happened is that because of recognition of exemplary work, in the Philippines, we have what we call the Manlilikha ng Bayan Awards, which identifies our master weavers and makes of them personalities that in a way does not really go with that communal space. It's both ways, no? Because by identifying a master weaver, then it gives her the responsibility to share this one with the next generation. But in the tradition of a group, it is a natural recognition without having an award. But that's another story. We live in a world where the ego needs to be shown and the awards are given, and that's fine. But in their own space where it is, the real life way of this is a natural respect of being able to learn from a master weaver, and the master weaver in a natural way must teach the next generation because it is her right it is like her duty, right? It is her duty of taking down something, perfecting her craft into a level of artistry, taking down the motifs, keeping it as exquisite as possible, and then sharing not just the skill, but the meaning of what she's doing and the motive of the community. It is a shared duty for the older, wiser master weavers that they must teach it to the young. Now the challenge is that because our cultures are changing, we have the young in a different mindset already of just going off to go to the call center because they make more money. So the material mindset has begun to happen. So there needs to be a way of letting the young indigenous women and men understand the value of what they're doing, because there is a way of livelihood. And this is where, as a museum, we want to celebrate the beauty and the exquisiteness of the high-end art, so that when people see it, like designers, they can now move it into something more lifestyle for everyday use. So there is really a purpose why we're making sure we document, we catalog, because without the role of museums to document these things, you will have innovations happening, and before you know it, the young indigenous weaver of a cultural community, for example, like the Tinalak of the Tiboli, they will weave what they like. Because now influences are everywhere. City comes in, technology brings something new. That form that is uniquely theirs will get lost if we do not have our museums document this, or documentaries and catalogs that do this kind of cultural heritage documentation. So this is what we're doing. We're bridging precisely this need. Our indigenous communities use their textile for specific purposes. Each group has a form. It has a cut. The Bagobo men's trousers are totally different from that example of the Maranao. It's just totally different. The way the women wrap in their Bagobo lower skirt, for example, is totally different by the way the Kalingas in the north would do it. No? So the use and styling of their textile, again, is also unique to them. Now, what happens, because of culture now mixing, and it's beginning to be really a fusion of the contemporary and the very traditional and the local, we're having now forms that are very Western or contemporary, like, specific shirt, dresses, and they just use the textiles of the indigenous so that it can be worn for daily life, which is fine. I believe that we want to get into this space without really losing or forgetting what is indigenous. There are levels of cultural, how would you say? I would say a stretch of culture, because culture is in everywhere, no? You have our indigenous cultures, a part of which we must document and keep. Then there must be an innovation space where we revitalize a tradition, right? So that this tradition now moves into everyday life that could be used in a pop contemporary space. And yet the link is clear without it looking too ethnic, There's all these different nuances of how we can bring our textiles to the use in daily life. And I believe that until all of us are conscious of it, then the real pride, when you say wear your culture with pride, is because deep down inside you know why you're using, that you begin to be wiser, I believe, if you began to use the power textile, for example, in a power suit. It makes it more meaningful, right? Or for example, a happy textile for more casual wear to make you happy. There's all these intangibles that if we looked at it, not just I'm going to get that motif from here and I'll put it right here. And then what? I'm using Filipino? Okay, for those uninformed. And that's why we want to inform. Because we can merge, we are merging this, and yet keep our tradition that is where it comes from fully documented, so that it's clear, it's different levels. And we can each step in one level depending on where we are, right? Cultural appropriation has become a buzzword that comes up, especially when our designers and our young entrepreneurs who are doing clothing and fashion accessories begin to take design into their own design. I mean, take the indigenous textiles design into their own design. And they think that it's their design. I think we have to be we have to have a fine line between this, no? When you begin to use that which is the indigenous people's as is, exactly as what it is their design. You might have a cut that's yours, but that's their design, their motif on your clothing. So you must give proper credit to the group or the indigenous community that is making this and the meaning for this. There's a whole space where sometimes a lot of our designers would get what is available there and then put it under their name. And that's it. And say, this is Filipino, right? It's a brand issue in the market space. You see, it's two totally different things. And this is where intellectual property of our indigenous communities must begin to be looked at. Our intellectual property has now a legal process where our community groups are not going to do it. Can you imagine? You have to get your motif, you have to go to the Department of Trade and Industry, have it marked, put the paperwork, do this every year, take note so that you can use that. It's crazy. But we are actually trying to do this in national development work by various groups to see how we can keep that intellectual property there. It might not be so bad for us in the local space, but the moment foreign groups come and get our designs that are ours and our motifs, and then mass produce it, and it has happened many times, where our ikat has been taken by foreign people, mass produced into factories, produced into through big machines into beautiful textiles with our motif. So, and then the indigenous groups don't even get anything, nothing, not even a mention, nothing. It's like the motif was stolen. So they could have gotten some monies from this, right? Because it's their own motif. So we need to be able to, all of us, be part of the community as people in the museum, people who work within the trade area, and the entrepreneurs and the designers. It's part of a growing direction. Let us place it correctly in that we do not lose out, or our small peoples do not lose out on what is really theirs. So when a designer comes, if their motif is inspired by, then they change it, then you say it is inspired by, right? And mention the group, right? It will always be helpful to mention the group because remember, your specific lifestyle commodity product is part of cultural education. You teach people your culture. If you give this gift of a beautiful bag or a jacket that actually made use of textile from Maguindanao, for example, that's major that you could teach people. But not everybody's there. Again, the mindset of our designers, because it's natural, is this is my design. But you're inspired by an indigenous group. So be very clear to mention the names, especially if you're getting it exactly. If that textile is exactly what you're going to use, mention it, right? The dress might be yours, but the textile is not. The motif is not. So this is where there's a gray area because some designers will say, but this is totally my creation now. Well, yes, but you got exactly that same textile. You didn't reweave it yourself, adding your new thing. You didn't reweave it. You didn't add your color. You didn't change it. So that's not really yours. Yeah, the dress is yours. You designed the dress, but the textile is theirs. So we need to honor this because if we cannot stand for them also, who will? These people are in a space of their own. They will continue weaving, and we don't want to take advantage. We want to help. So as designers and as people in the brand space, in the market space, let us just make sure we share. We share this story. We share the fact where it comes from. Because at the end, it also will bring other people there to them to help them with livelihood also. The global world today is totally homogeneous. The same. You go to a mall, you'll have all the same brands, global brands, everywhere in the world. So what's different? This is where culture becomes capital. And this whole value of culture as capital has become or has started as a trend very consciously, perhaps maybe a decade back, by few groups, no? And mostly those in the space of where culture is, because they could see the onslaught of a global space coming in, and the small people are dying, the culture's dying, they have no money, it's poor, right? So the need to survive, to keep livelihood alive, to make themselves feel part of a global space that is encroaching there, was where things began to happen. So the value of in a way, the globalization was to be able to bring a global world, often asleep from culture, right? The roots of it closer. Now, in the past 10 years, there's been a whole revival of this. It's like understanding that if I go, for example, and see the H&Ms and the Starbucks and all the brands around, what's different? Where's the unique spirit? You'll find that in the groups, indigenous groups, and globally in the world. It could be anywhere from a Mayan woven textile, you know, to a Aztec textile, to a Igorot textile, to a Kalinga. So all of this are coming from the roots of cultural communities, which carry the DNA of a country, of a culture. Here in the country, we have so much. From north to south, imagine 7,100 islands. Each of those indigenous communities, I don't even have the number. There's so many of them. But each of that is rich. It's so rich with forms and motifs and color and expression, as all countries have. For those countries that are so global, that do not have this, they go to areas like Africa and Latin America, to Asia, precisely because these are where the culture bearers are, you know? And in our country, this revival is beautifully seen right now in the space of fashion because it's what people can relate to. It's often hard to relate, for example, to dance, because not everybody is going to dance in a traditional way or well, music is there. But more in fashion, because everybody has to wear something and has a choice what to wear. So it's a revival. And it's because culture has become capital. What will make me unique when I go, for example, to a convention internationally? Because I'm wearing a beautiful top that is finely hand-woven versus a jacket I bought in a big department store, right? I don't care how beautiful you are with the jewelry, and it might be so contemporary, that's fine. But what will make me stand out in an international space, and you will find this in all international conferences, are beautiful indigenous textiles that are often used traditionally and a lot right now revitalized, created more for daily wear and contemporary wear. And that's the revival, because when you go out there in the world, even here in the Philippines, you go out to a major convention, it's like you're carrying with pride your culture. If this is our only way to say, I'm a Filipino, and look at the beauty of style, but look at the hand-woven meaning I carry in this beautiful style, you're already global, because that's a capital you put in the world, not just in the Philippines. You put it out into the world. That becomes, it's added value, right? Because anybody can buy a jacket in any big department store that is expensive. But to find this very hard to weave, specific, beautiful textile in your jacket, you will eventually have somebody say, where did you get that jacket? Why is it so unique? What is it about it that has a different feel? That's all I can say, it's a feel. So there are ways of using it. You can go very ethnic, very bohem, right? And you can dress like them. But this is very hard to do every day, unless you're a gypsy, a bohemian, or, it's very hard. Most of us are in day jobs. We travel, we're in the cities. So how can we now incorporate, get inspired, revitalize tradition in a place where what you're wearing does not have to scream ethnic, right? It doesn't have to scream ethnic, but it's woven by our contemporary, our indigenous groups, maybe. The motif is there, it's more subtle, maybe colors have changed a little. And this is, again, I'll have to say, this is where we need to look at the value of keeping culture documented as is, and then innovating. You can't mix them. It has to go parallel, because innovation and revitalizing that of tradition is your continuing process of culture being expressed. And meanwhile, we keep documenting the DNA. It's a DNA we can't lose totally. Because maybe, 50 years from now, that tinalak will look totally different, because maybe we're using metallic threads with our motif, right? And maybe there's a new amber color, whatever. But we will have something to look back on and say, oh, this is how they did the abaca. They pounded it. They had to color it with vegetable dyes, a very hard technique. They had to weave it and put it together in a way where it is about ikat, the ikat tradition. And what is that ikat tradition? It's not happening anymore now, 10, 50 years, example, 50 years down the line with this metallic ikat, Why? Because maybe the place of the tribes are gone. We don't know. But we need to document in a photograph, in a piece, in the museum, right? We keep it there because it is our DNA. And that's why, at the end, we revitalize our culture, yes. We continue our tradition to be alive, yes. But let us not forget, we give credit to where it came from. We give a value to the inspiration from when it came from. And we keep and document that which is truly that of the groups. And that's what the museum work is all about. The role of the Yuchengco Museum is to give this broader context to a new fad, maybe a new movement that is happening. It's great. A lot of young entrepreneurs are coming in, designing, a yakan outfit and using a specific textile. But I believe that at the end of it, the entrepreneurs must also dive into the material they're using, right? Because and not just say, oh, I'm using yakan today, and what is yakan? No, dive. And this is where our role as museum is about. Because in the broader context of everything, the basic force and or statement is that of culture that is changing, that we cannot not look at. Because when we go into a global space, not just in fashion, but in anything we do, what separates and or makes us unique is our culture. So this whole movement of knowing your culture and being proud about it really means you need to know your culture, which is why it's important to look at exhibitions, why it is important to visit museums, why collections of indigenous communities are important, because it gives you that fuel to go deeper, to look at, this is the reason why we are doing this series, precisely because education and cultural education gives you that added value, whether you're an entrepreneur, a speaker, a designer, somebody going out there carrying a part of our culture, right? So carry it with depth, carry it with pride. But you can only do that if you were to study and learn more, which is what our role is through our cultural education materials.